afternoon, everyone, or morning if you're in LA, or evening if you're out in Poland. So we got a wide variety here. We're covering all the time zones. What can I say? So hope everyone's doing well. It's like I said, busy day, but we are here with, I'm going to mispronounce that, Bruce Solheim.
Solheim.
Solheim. And Julia, I'm not even going to try to pronounce the last name. I am one that butchers names, we'll put it that way. But can y'all tell us a little bit about what y'all write? Or wait, Bruce, what you write, and Julia, you're the illustrator.
Yeah, sure. Okay. I'm a professor of history by day and a comic book writer and producer, creator by night. So my day job, I've been teaching American history for 30 years and over 30 years. But I've always loved comic books. That's how I learned how to read. And been a frustrated comic book artist who's not satisfied with my own technical skills. So I'm lucky enough to work with really good artists. And my first comic book that I published was in 2019. And it took me 37 years to create it, 37 years in the making. It's called Snark. And I got Gary Dumm to do the artwork for that. He was Harvey Picar's primary artist, I guess, for American Splendor. And when I decided that there's an offshoot character called Dr. Jekyll, Alien Hunter, and she was part of the Snark #2 comic book that came out. And I decided she needed her own comic book. She was just too important, too interesting of a character. And Gary was not available, so I found Julia, and I'm very happy that I found Julia to be the artist for Dr. Jekyll. So I guess that's why we're here today. But so I've been collecting comics and wanting to publish a comic and drawing my own comics since I was a little kid. And I owe everything to comics, because I wouldn't be a professor today if it wasn't for comics. Like I said, that's how I learned how to read. So I had trouble learning how to read. So that's quite an introduction, I guess.
Well, as everybody knows, I just got done with Comic Palooza and did tons of interviews there. But one of the biggest questions that I've asked, and to me, it's everyone has a story. What inspired you to start writing for comic books? Because I know it's harder to write comic books than it is an actual book. There's a big difference.
My inspiration, besides the fact that I owe so much to comic books, it really boils down to, you can, like Harvey Picar said, you can do anything with words and pictures. And because I have some limited artistic ability, I can create storyboards for my artists to work from, which makes it a lot easier to get, kind of my idea across. And so it's my favorite. Of all the things I've done, I've written plays that have been produced. I've written academic books, paranormal books, a novel. I've done a lot of writing, poetry, but my favorite way of communicating is through comic books, because I feel it's unlimited. There's no limitations to it. It's not like, just confined to superhero comics, as you know. I mean, of course, that's what a lot of people start off with, but Harvey Picar realized that there is a market for these autobiographical comics that delve into some deeper literary themes and things like that. So I combine that with my interest in cartoons, especially Rocky and Bullwinkle was one of my favorite shows. So when I created my own comic, Snark, and then this one, Dr. Jekyll, I was thinking about how it could be read at different levels. So I wanted it to be all ages, but I wanted it to be sophisticated enough so that an adult could read it and say, oh, I get it. Maybe a kid won't get it necessarily, but they'll still enjoy it for other reasons. But an adult will read it and get it. And kind of the way, when I go back and look at the old Rocky and Bullwinkle, how that was.
I remember that show. We don't talk about our age. Julie, what actually, I know you're the illustrator, but what actually inspired you to get into art? Because, like I said, everybody has their stories.
Okay, so I've always liked to draw since I was a little kid, and I guess that I just never stopped because I guess many kids draw when they're young, but most of the people stop eventually, and I guess loved it too much to stop, and that's why I do it till today. I've always liked art, and now I actually study it at college. But comics were always the art form that I liked the most. I've also been reading them since I was a little kid. And since I also loved drawing, then I obviously started to um, draw things from the comics I liked, and I noticed that I really enjoy this comic form. And yes, I guess one of the major things that inspired me to do comics was because I simply liked reading them, and I wanted to do something like that on my own. And I always practiced it, and I was dreaming about doing it professionally one day. That's why I was really happy when Bruce reached out to me. And I'm really happy that I'm able to be here, and that I was able to work on a comic that actually got published, and I certainly hope for more. And I think that one of the things that I like about comics is that, like you said, there's a story to it, and I just always enjoyed art that shares a certain story more than just a single illustration, which I also like to do from time to time, but I just enjoy stories much more. That's why I also really love animation, but comics were always much closer to my heart because I have a lifetime relationship with them, kind of.
I have definitely been there. So, do you have a favorite comic or comic character, that one that you feel draws more to you personally?
I guess I do. I maybe not have a favorite one, but I have one that really inspired me, and it's a manga actually, because that's what I've actually mostly been reading. I've also read some comics from other countries, but mostly manga. And there's that manga called Bakuman, and it's actually a manga about kids writing a manga. I don't know if you heard about it, but it really inspired me to do it on my own. Like, I've read this story about these two kids getting into manga industry, doing their best to create the best manga in the world, and to make a living of it, and be popular, get people to read their stuff. And it really like seeing how this can be kind of done in real life inspired me that maybe I also would be able to do it one day.
Very nice. Now, do y'all have anything coming out soon? Are y'all working on any projects that we can talk about? I mean, sometimes you keep things secret, especially in the comic world, but is there anything able to discuss?
Well, Dr. Jekyll just came out. What was it, 2 months ago, Julia? Was that it? 2 months ago?
Yeah, I think I don't really know the exact date it was published, but I think we finished early in May.
Yeah, so I think that, May. Dr. Jekyll #1 came out, and I'm already writing and putting together storyboards for Dr. Jekyll #2, which Julia is going to illustrate too. And I've been sharing those stories with her, one at a time as I come up with them, and to our editor, George Varangos, who lives up in Seattle. So we got all the bases covered with geographically. And he's really talented editor. And then the thing that'll come out before that, it'll come out early next year, is Snark #3, the third issue of Snark, and it'll be a graphic novel. It'll be at least 60 pages, which Dr. Jekyll is. So technically, I guess, a graphic novel. So that's coming out next year, and that's Gary Dumm's going to be illustrating that. He's already working on the first few stories, and it's fun how the two comics are connected. So their universe, it's the same universe, and the characters are working in each other's light, if you will. And I enjoy that. And they're, as far as other projects, I do have a more autobiographical comic that I've already written, and I don't know when that's going to come out, but that I call it Gig Line. Like I was in the Army for 6 years, and Gig Line is kind of like where you have to line up all the buttons on your shirt with your belt buckle and everything. Gig Line. So anyway, I just thought that'd be a cool name for a comic, and it's kind of things that have happened to me, remarkable, interesting things that have happened to me since I was a kid, that I think have there's a moral to each story. So I have that produced, and who knows what else. I'm updating a textbook that I'm writing too. It is related to comics, and I'm getting Gary Dumm to do because in my textbook that I have for my American history class, I have a comic book page for each chapter. So we have to do a new one for this new chapter I'm writing. So Gary's working on that. So that's kind of what I'm doing.
Now we do a lot with artists and comic book creators, and we let them post their stuff on our page because that's what we're about. Do y'all have any kicks? Do y'all do this with Kickstarters? Do you have a Patreon?
With Snark #1, I did one of the crowdfunding. Now I can't remember which one it was. And so we used crowdfunding for that. But for Snark #2 and Dr. Jekyll, I just did it myself and published through KDP Amazon, which has its advantages and disadvantages. But the biggest advantage is that for Snark #2 and Dr. Jekyll, I don't have thousands of comic books in boxes in my garage to add to my other boxes of stuff I have. So, that's kind of an advantage. But I did like publishing Snark #1 myself. So there was nobody else involved with it, but then again, you don't have the marketing and you don't have all that stuff. So creating the comic, writing it, even illustrating, all that stuff, that's a lot of work, a lot of expense, but the hardest part is really the marketing part of it. And but in my case, I do it for the love of comics. I know people probably say that all the time, but I have a day job, so I don't rely on the income from it. And I always feel like for Julia especially, I'm hoping that somebody picks it up and says and realizes how talented she is and says, I want her to illustrate my stuff, and maybe some other stuff will come out of it for her. And that's what I'm always hoping. And with Gary Dumm, he's been around since the 70s illustrating comics, so he has more work than he can accomplish. That's why I like to wedge myself in there every once in a while. And I'm sure it'll be that way with Julia eventually too, that I'll have to somehow wedge something in there to try to get her attention.
Well, one of the main things, like our main show is the Con Hour, so we talk about conventions all the time. Mm-hmm. We talked a little bit before the show, but what are some of your favorite conventions that you've been to, and do you plan on trying to go into any to sell your product? And this is actually for both of y'all. the question.
Julia, you want to answer first about conventions or Comic-Cons?
Okay, so I've been to some conventions, but not many. I don't know really if in Poland we have about the same amount of conventions as in the other countries. I guess it might be a little less than in America. Just guessing. But yeah, I've been to like three, I think, one smaller one and one a little bigger, but I still think it could have not been as big as conventions in USA, for example. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. I was mostly there for manga back then because that's what I'm mostly interested in. But yeah, I always wanted to attend Comic-Con. That was a little later in my life when I got also interested in comics from other countries, and well, I was thinking more professionally about actually illustrating comics one day, and that was what got me to wanting to attend Comic-Con, because I know it happens in Poland. I don't know really when though, because I kind of stopped looking into it, because when I wanted to go, then the pandemic started. So I kind of, well, later I didn't come back to looking because other stuff in life, well, came in and I had less time.
Well, I definitely know a few out in that area. We've actually had Dublin on our show, so I do know that they're out there. So if you're ever interested, I can send you a link I have a link with all the countries, so I can send you a link where you can know where some of the other conventions are.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I've been to the biggest one I've been to. I haven't been to San Diego, but I've been to the LA Comic-Con it's been about 8-9 years ago, and that was pretty big, pretty crazy. I hadn't published my comic yet when I went there, but in 2019, when I had just published Snark #1, I went to the Pasadena Comic-Con, and it was a nice size Comic-Con. There were, a couple thousand people there, but it wasn't too big. And I got to meet some industry, some artists from some of the big comic book companies and some legendary people. And that was a lot of fun. And meeting all the, customers and potential customers and other small publishers. And I really enjoyed it. And I learned a lot from that experience, what people are looking for. And there's very much a theatrical aspect to it. It's not just like in the 70s. I remember when I grew up in Seattle, I think I remember going to an early, I don't even know if you can call them conventions. They're more like, I went to one of the original Star Trek conventions in Seattle, like in the mid to early 70s. And it was very small. It was like at not even a big hotel. And it was like in one conference room. So that was the kind of comic stuff I went to in the 70s, and I enjoyed it. And it was mainly, just collectors and a few people selling comics, the small comic stores, mom and pop comic book stores. So, but nowadays it's huge business, of course. And and of course now we have e-comics and everything else that makes it interesting. But the cool thing about all of that is that I love the atmosphere of it, because it all comes down to story and how you convey that story and with words and pictures. And it's just remarkable to me how powerful the art form is, and and what you can do with comics. And some people say that comic books are on their way out, but I don't think so. I think a whole new generation is getting excited and we'll see the potential of it. So, yeah, that's been my experience with conventions. I think they're very important, and the pandemic has stood in the way of the last couple of years, but I hope to break out of that.
Well, before we go, I'd like to ask each of you one more question. Are there any words of wisdom you'd like to give any of our listeners for if they want to jump into writing comic books or art?
Go ahead, Julia. Have you go first.
Okay, so I just always tend to tell people to never give up on your dreams, no matter what happens and no matter what others might tell you, or if you have any doubts yourself in your head. But I always believe that no matter what talent or skill you start with, and no matter what family situation or more like life situation you start in, if you never give up, you can achieve anything with hard work. So yeah, that would be my advice. Just don't give up.
Julia has wisdom beyond her years. She's a very young person, but I totally agree. And my case in point is my first comic book. I conceived of the character in 1981, and then when I was in the Army, actually in Germany, in a guard tower when I came up with the character. And then I did a comic strip when I was in engineering school in Butte, Montana in 1982. I did 5 comic strips in the school newspaper, and it was very popular. And then life got in the way, and I just put it on the back burner, and I just never forgot about it. I didn't give up, but life got in the way. And 37 years later, I published the Snart comic book. So that's a real example of how not to give up on your dream. And I'm so glad that I finally got around to it and found really good artists like Gary Dumm and Julia Kazanowska and our editor, George Barongos. And they just, the excitement that you generate when your idea comes into life with these people helping you do that. I mean, it's very powerful. The only thing that even comes close is when I've written plays that have been produced and performed and seen your words on stage, your story on stage. That comes close to it, but for some reason, comic books, it's even more powerful to me because you have it right in front of you. You can look at it any time, whereas the play, you have to remember, oh yeah, I remember what it looked like, but the comic book, it's right there, for as long as you want it to be. So I would agree with you.
Very good words of wisdom, actually. But everyone, it's time for us to go. We will be on tomorrow night at 6 p.m. And then, of course, our show with AnchorCon up in Clayton, New York on Thursday at 6 p.m. So until then, everyone, adios.